Lastly, we come to virtue ethics. This will be the fourth and the last ethical theory we're going to be talking about today. But again, remember back to this diagram I showed you. There's that dashed line there that separates utilitarianism, justice theory, and Kantianism from virtue ethics. Because there's some people, some philosophers that say virtue ethics isn't really an actual ethical theory, right? Because remember what did we say ethical theories were? They were guidelines that help us make decisions, essentially, right? And some people say that virtue ethics doesn't really do that the same way that utilitarianism, Kantianism, justice theory do, right? They have principles that have and categories that have to be checked off, whereas virtue ethics doesn't really have that. It's a lot more open-ended. Personally, I still will consider it an ethical theory, but again, like I said, this is all just to inform you. It's not to persuade you. You get to make up your own mind and your own feelings and your own thoughts about ethics. But let's dig into virtue theory. So virtue ethics was pioneered by Aristotle, who was an ancient Greek philosopher. He was the one that kind of formed this whole theory, flushed it out, but then contemporarily, it was advanced by Carol Gilligan and her co-workers and colleagues who kind of advanced this virtue ethics theory in the 20th century up until currently. And essentially what virtue ethics is all about is a lifelong journey to build good virtues, to build up your personal character, to be a virtuous person. So what does all of that really mean? Well, virtue ethics is all about an individual's journey to reaching eudaimonia. It's a word that Aristotle used. It's an ancient Greek word, and it loosely translated, it essentially means good spirit or the good life. Anything that makes life good. So having a flourishing life, prosperity, having welfare, having happiness, all of that creates a good life, eudaimonia. And how do we reach that eudaimonia? Well, it's by being virtuous people. That's what this whole virtue ethics is all about. Aristotle said that to be ethical is to be virtuous so that we can reach eudaimonia. If everybody was virtuous and everybody was in search of that eudaimonia, the good life, then life would be good, right? So what are virtues? Well, virtues are those like character traits, those personality traits, things like patience, courage, honesty, right? All of those types of traits. But Aristotle goes and digs a little bit deeper here. He says that every virtue comes with two extremes. One of deficiency, meaning we have too little of that said virtue, or an extreme of excess, which means we have too much of it. So let's look through a couple examples here. So if we have the virtue courage, it's going to come with those two extremes. What happens if we have too little courage? Right? We're going to have cowardice. If we don't have any courage, we're going to be more cowardice, right? And then what if we have too much courage? What's that extreme look like? That's probably rashness. We're too rash when we make decisions, when we do things, right? So, and as you can see on the bottom there, the virtues that we want, the good virtues right in the middle, are called the golden mean. And that word mean comes from that mathematical term, right? The mean of something is kind of like the average. So in this case, it's that midpoint. Okay, let's look through another example here. Now we're going to be talking about patience, okay? You know the saying, patience is a virtue? Okay, well, what happens if we have too little patience? We don't have enough of it. What do we call that? Well, we call that impulsiveness. We're too impulsive. We make decisions very impulsively when we should actually be taking some more time to think about it. What happens if we have too much patience? We wait for a long time. Well, maybe that gets more into indecision, where we have so much patience that we never actually act. We never actually decide on something. So the golden mean is patience. And for our last example here, we have modesty. So if we have too little modesty, not enough of it, maybe we're more shameless, right? Or maybe if we're taking it another way, it could be boastfulness, right? We don't have enough modesty. But if we have too much modesty, it could be shyness. Maybe we're just too shy. When we should be more modest, where we accept the good things about us, right? We accept praise and everything like that, compliments, but we're not taking it to the boastfulness side, the prideful side of things. Okay? We want to be in the middle. We want to be in that golden mean, or at least that's what Aristotle says. That's what virtue ethics say. Okay? But again, ethics is all about actions, right? Like we said, ethics is all about helping us decide what we should do and what we should not do. So how do all of these virtues help us make those decisions? Well, again, we have to say, will this action help me achieve golden mean virtues? And then subsequently, eudaimonia, the good life. If the answer is no, that means it's unethical. If we make a decision that leads us more, let's go back here, to be impulsive, then that's not good. If we make a decision that maybe is more indecisive, or maybe it leads to cowardice, again, that's unethical. But if we make decisions that uphold courage and modesty and patience and all these other virtues, then it would be an ethical decision. Okay, let's look at an actual example and apply virtue ethics to it. So we have the shopping cart example. You go to the grocery store, you load up your shopping cart, bring it back to your car, you load up your car. What do you do with that empty shopping cart now? Do you just leave it there right in the parking lot? Or do you walk it back to one of those bays, put it back, and then go back to your car? Well, a lazy person would leave it there. Would just leave it there. They have employees, someone will get it, or some other person will take it back. Just hop in your car and leave. Right? But a responsible person would take it back. And again, that responsible is a good virtue to have. But then if you go to the extreme of excess, maybe you might be a bit overzealous and wander the parking lot and take everybody's shopping carts back for them, right? Then maybe that's a bit too overzealous. That's too much. That's too much responsibility. But if you're responsible for your shopping cart and you bring it back, that is an ethical decision to make. Now, the last thing I want to say about virtue ethics, if I go back to the first slide here, here we go, one too many, was again, I mentioned Carol Gilligan and her colleagues who advanced this virtue theory. And they advanced it by including more virtues that were more traditionally feminine in nature. Things like care and compassion, hospitality, right? All those good virtues too. Because when Aristotle was kind of forming this whole theory, he was more focused on those traditionally masculine traits that would have applied more to his day and era where, it was the men making a lot of these decisions, right? But Carol Gilligan was like, hold on, let's think about this. It's not just about these male attributes like courage and things like that, or what I should say, traditionally masculine, right? But she wanted to ensure that there were traditionally feminine virtues too, because they're all good. Care, compassion. And that's why her theory is called ethics of care. It's a virtue ethics theory trying to pioneer and uphold these more traditionally feminine virtues, but also it's more relationship based. It's more relational, right? Whereas Aristotle is very individuals making decisions for themselves. Carol Gilligan and her colleagues realize, no, we're a communal species. We make decisions, we have families, we have friends. Maybe there's some more to virtue ethics than just making our own individual decisions to reach the good life, and maybe it's a bit more relational. Okay, so if you can combine both Aristotle and Carol Gilligan's theories together, I think that would be a good, very holistic virtue ethics.